Welcome, everyone. Thank you to you all for coming along today for another session of our We Declare panel sessions. Yeah! Raise up, everyone. And we always appreciate to all of you who show up in person, so we're able to obviously not lose that component of face-to-face interaction. But we also appreciate all of you on the Zoom call. Thank you for showing up and being part of this conversation. And we look forward to having you participate in our yarn, so to speak, for tonight. But I just want to kick off with a little bit of test of your own language. So, Namarni. Yeah, some of you guys got it. The response to Namarni, you good, is, you said it. You said it. Warni ai. So we today are broadcasting and hosting our session from Ghana land. Sometimes, of course, a simple greeting of hello can go a long way in terms of understanding language and appreciation of culture. And of course, by acknowledging that our event is held today held on Tandanya, which is, of course, the traditional lands of the Ghana people, we want to at least say hello in their language to acknowledge that we are from this land, and we have, especially on today. Today is National Sari Day, where we acknowledge the atrocities of the stolen generation. And every time we create, from our perspective, the ASBN's perspective, every time we're able to create connections, making bridges, and also appreciation of our Aboriginal communities, we're also able to help healing of our own societies, and of course tying into our own theme today around rewilding and healing of our ecologies. But in saying all of that, I also want to acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded for these lands, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And for all of us here in this room, and also on the Zoom session, we'd always like to invite everyone, as in that is part of the ASBN community, to find a way to appreciate and respect Aboriginal culture, respect their connection to land, and if we are also going to be inhabitants of this land, try to also embody that ethic. As you, hopefully you all know that Tandanya, of course, is also known as Adelaide, South Australia. That's the more common name of the land that we are on today, and where we thrive as a community here in Adelaide. And in terms of geography, we also want to acknowledge that the traditional lands of the Ghana people extend all the way to the Adelaide Hills, where it borders on the Paramount Nation, all the way down to the Fleurieu, a beautiful place in South Australia, which is the lands of the Ngarrindjeri people, and of course upward north to the Yorkes Peninsula, another beautiful place in South Australia, which borders the traditional lands of the Narungga, the Nukanu, and the Ngadjuri people as well. So for us to also respect our Aboriginal communities, I think it's also good that we become a little bit more familiar with the geographies of these lands as well. So again, as a collective, we very much pay our respects to all Indigenous communities all around Australia, for wherever people are joining us from Zoom. And And I can't reinforce enough that we all have the opportunity to further inhabit an ethic toward land and also to culture that can really start to facilitate a more regenerative future, which, if any of you were part of our sessions earlier in the year, we were talking a lot about regeneration. And with that, acknowledgement of country, once again, welcome everyone. Welcome to anyone who's just joined us on Zoom. My name is Ken Long. I am the chairperson of the Adelaide Sustainable Building Network, also shortened to ASBN. Just so you're all aware, Zoom people, once again, I mentioned it before, you don't have to raise your hand or get permission from us to get up, get a tea, your own beverage. We're all in here together. For all of you joining us in person, just a couple of housekeeping notes. The ASBN, we always run a zero waste event, so make sure you put your disposable, well, if it's compostable, disposable, they're in the proper box. You have some glasses that might have some fantastic biodynamic organic wine from the Riverland, from Whistling Kite. You will not be going home with those glasses. That is called property theft. And of course, toilets. We have one straight through the door over there, and there's also a couple more downstairs. If you go down the stairs and take a hard right, you'll be able to find some more toilets down there. And of course, if there is an emergency, we will calmly and collected march our way down the stairs and go outside the front door where you came in. Simple enough? Yeah. Who's been to an ASBN session before? All right. So we got some newcomers. And don't worry, that's okay, because we're always want to invite as many people as we can. Just so you all are aware of who we are an organization which our main vision is to inspire built environments which regenerate people and planet. And we're very conscientious of trying to put that language of regenerate in terms of what we would like to see and what we'd like to advocate for, mainly because we feel that regeneration doesn't only talk about the great things around sustainability and the importance of sustainability and reducing our impact on the environment, but at the same time, as we're doing that, let's start to envision how we're able to positively impact the environment, positively impact culture, positively impact each other, and a lot of the things that we do. And of course, the built environment extends to all of us. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a professional in the built environment or just walking down the street of Adelaide or Tandanya, that you are interacting with the built environment, and our built environment must respond to the needs of people, to environment, and of course, to make sure that we all thrive together as much as possible. And of course, so today, how that relates into what we're talking about today is that earlier in some of our We Declare sessions, we acknowledge that the built environment industry, we really need to talk about the climate crisis. The climate crisis will really bring upon a lot of discomfort for us if we don't do anything about it. And the built environment has an incredible opportunity to actually address a lot of issues that will come upon us through climate change. But the other end of this, right, is that as we are creating a lot of carbon emissions and global warming, waste, polluting our waters, we're also taking away a lot of natural and ecological communities. And by doing that, we're also exacerbating the issue of climate change. So if perhaps we as a place, as a city, as a community in Adelaide in South Australia, we we have almost a responsibility to increase our efforts to green our urban environments, and also take the opportunity to enhance biodiversity. And once again, we have all the tools. We'll talk about it here a little bit, but we have all the tools. But at the end of the day, we have the will and the organizational capacity to really think about how to make sure that we are integrating a lot of rewilding. So once again, in the language of regenerative, we have this opportunity to create, not necessarily just like, we'll talk about what does rewilding actually mean, but really thinking about our communities are also dependent on our ecological communities as well. So are we going to fully grasp this opportunity? So our event, for those of you that have been here before, you kind of know the deal. We got to make sure that these fine people up here with me are have their chops lubricated. You know what I'm saying? I'm also giving them a toss-up ball to make sure that, well, one, they feel comfortable. We're making sure that they feel comfortable sitting up here. Public speaking is actually very scary, don't you think? Yeah. So we really appreciate you for taking this opportunity to do this for us. But the other second part is we're just trying to get this conversation on like rails, right? We want to make sure that we're making sure these fine people all have a fantastic experience, fantastic knowledge, and passions around environment that we want to make sure that we're able to channel that in the right direction and we're not going all over the place. However, I think it's also very important that we introduce them, right? Y'all want to know who these people are? Yes. Zoom, you kind of know, but I'll give you the full bio, okay? All right. So, in no particular order, I'm just going to go down the line. We have Dr. Michael DiMatteo. Thank you for joining us here, Michael. So Michael is a senior environmental engineer with Water Technology, coastal environmental and water consultants. Very passionate about delivering multiple livability benefits to Australian communities through integrated water management. And he is also the winner of the inaugural Stormwater South Australia Young Professional Award of 2020. Let's just shoulder off a little bit. And Michael, ow! But amongst that, he also has a doctorate from the University of Adelaide, which he looked into multi-criteria optimization for planning and design of stormwater systems. So technically proficient, but also at the same time, making sure that diving into really necessary research as well. And he's also, through all of this, he's also an adjunct lecturer at the University of Adelaide, trying to extend his passions and knowledge over to the emerging sort of professional field. So thank you so much, Michael. Give him a round of applause. Make him feel welcome, everyone. And next to Michael, we have Eleanor Walker. Hello, Eleanor. Thank you for joining us. And Eleanor is the current president of the South Australian Division of the Planning Institute of Australia, PIA, which is the peak body of planning industry, and is also the director of ESD Planning and Design, which is an Adelaide-based consultancy that specializes in facilitating environmentally sustainable developments. Eleanor has also worked in the planning industry for over 20 years in both local government and planning consulting in both Victoria and South Australia. And another fantastic note is that over the last 18 months, she has also led the planning committee through what in South Australia we have just gone through all the state planning reforms. So Eleanor was very instrumental in making sure that that went through with advocacy around sustainability and conservation. So thank you so much for what you're doing, but also for joining us, Eleanor.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And then along down the line, we have Katarina Baumann, who is a senior landscape architect at Bird's Eye Studio. Kat is, can I just say Kat? We're friends. We're kind of friends. We're all friends, but yeah. Kat is passionate about open space design for all ages and abilities, including play spaces, sports, and recreation. She has a special interest in fitness, health, and wellness, and how to make sure that that is creatively integrated into the themes, and also enabling that through landscape design. Kat is also particularly fascinated by coastal ecosystems, beach girl, I guess, and also permaculture practices, and which also very much informs her own design practice. So thank you so much for joining us, Kat. And to the right of Kat is Ben Seamark, who is the principal consultant of Forestry Australia and also the co-founder of the Forestry software system, which is aimed at improving the management of urban trees around the world. So in 2018, Ben was awarded the TreeNet National Leadership in Urban Forestry, and he is currently an advisor member, currently in the advisory board member of the Australian School of Urban Forestry as well. Ben's work has spanned throughout Australia and also internationally, and a key international appointment was in 2020. Ben was invited to Riyadh to advise on the Prince of Saudi Arabia's ambitious reforestation project to plant 7 million trees by 2030. Pew, pew, pew. South Australia, yes, exporting knowledge to the world. This is what happens from this place. Remember, Tanzania is a very special place where there's a lot of knowledge that goes out. And last but not least, but it's also because he wants to sit in the most comfy and cool chair, is Liam Crook. And Liam is currently the Offsets Program Coordinator for the Nature Foundation South Australia. He is a technical specialist with over 10 years experience working on ecological and organizational and citywide decarbonization projects. He has a Bachelor of Applied Science in Grassland Ecology and also a graduate certificate in Environmental Policy and Management. So once again, make everyone here feel welcome. So just jumping into the questions, the one thing that I wanted to note is that the flavor of our conversation obviously is very diverse. Regenerative futures, sustainable futures, they'll never come about if we stay in silos. And that's why, another reason why we're so appreciative as an organization that we're able to tap into the expertise and also insight that you all have, and because all of you will be able to, thread some gaps and also share in terms of shared learning within us all. We think it's a very big opportunity to make sure that, especially people that are always in the built environment, get to kind of let's get back a little bit. Let's extend our reach. You can laugh. You can laugh. Now, so we got to define this, right? Like, what is rewilding? So, to our panel, and hopefully we can get a little bit of insight from you all. Within your line of work, what would you actually consider best practice of rewilding of urban areas? Is it that all physical projects need to be that are instigated needs to have almost rewilding benchmarks or KPIs in there, or is it that we actually need more bigger structural decision-making mechanisms that also need to be changed, sort of like the planning reform and things of that nature? But I'm just trying to get a sense from you all, like where where are the opportunities, and what can that define in terms of what is rewilding in your sphere? You got the mic, Kat. You're up first.
Okay. So I guess I could just start at the really high level. Rewilding for landscape architecture, it's kind of a buzzword, to be honest, and it's what we do and try to do in every single project. So trying to integrate as much green infrastructure as possible so that our natural systems are as seamless as possible. Probably not the best word to use because they're not seamless, but trying to promote the health of them through our built environment and also to undo the damage that we've done. In terms of management structures and decision-making processes, I think the big challenge that we face at this point in time, and will continue to face for a long time, is that people still value money over the environment. And it's easy in a room full of, I'm assuming, like-minded people, to forget that a lot of people don't value what we value. So it's about educating those people, but then also putting it into their language. Money speaks. How can we put a monetary value on the environment, on putting green infrastructure in? Do we start paying people to be installing those things? So, research into creating those KPIs so that we can then, meet them. Yeah, you gave the microphone, so you're next.
All right, I'm going to make this really controversial, and I'll agree, but I'll also disagree.
Do it.
Some elements, just to make it exciting. But it is. I think people fundamentally, and what I'll disagree with, I think fundamentally everybody gets it. They just might not have it at the surface. They might not understand how to deliver it. But I think everybody has genetically built in a connection with nature, and I think that's what we're talking about here. And so, in my focus has been on simplifying the message and communicating that message so that people can connect with it, because I'm an environmental manager, that's my background, and it's very, very complicated. It's very, very complicated to communicate, and I think the story gets lost a little bit. And I was at the cultural burn, I think that was last week, and it was just put beautifully when they were talking about that, about when the grass is long and the trees have a diminished canopy, they call it upside down country. And I just think, for me, I get that as a arboricultural person and working with nature. And I think it's those simple messages just to connect us with nature. And I think that's something that that we could definitely improve on. But yeah, I agree with everything that you said before. We need to value nature, and I think that's built into us already. We just got to bring it to the surface.
Michael, could I bring you in just quickly, because that aspect around even finances are ongoing sort of discussion. It's actually always brought up even in our sessions, right? And especially working in infrastructure, there's a lot of things where it's like, oh no, we're going to be saving a lot of money over the long term, or there's great opportunities here. So not only just reflecting on sort of like your own definition of what's best practice in terms of rewilding, but through sort of like the infrastructure lens, what are also the opportunities that might address things around the finances as well?
Yeah, so I guess the way so I'm just thinking about recent research projects where we've identified that in the stormwater space, there are already large budgets for flood management, because there's a recognised value, like monetary value, of addressing flooding issues. So you're protecting valuable assets from being inundated and all the consequences from that. So we realise that you have to solve that problem because it's a recognised problem and there's budget for it. But then with the same infrastructure, can you have added value and added multiple benefits from the same piece of infrastructure? So it might be in the stormwater space, it's introducing storage, so slowing down water, making sure that the water quality can improve for your day-to-day water quality management, but then still achieving those big necessary goals of achieving flood management. So yeah, I can go into it in a bit more detail, but I think the concept of achieving multiple benefits with the same piece of infrastructure and using that infrastructure for the regeneration efforts, you're starting to use existing budgets that are already there, but just covering more bases with that. So,
and like for instance, something that has come up in a past ASBN event where we got a presentation on the Oakland wetlands, and the realization that saves the city of Marion millions of dollars every year because of that investment of infrastructure. But that has also become a recreational space. It has become a place where you can connect with nature. It's been a place where actually you can do a lot of STEM learning, learning about ecology, all those kind of things. So then, that's sort of like the multiple layers of of these infrastructure projects, and that's the opportunities that they present.
Yeah, it's probably a lot more interesting than what it was before, like a unused
desolate
driving instruction facility. But yeah, really sort of a great piece of research recently by the CRC for water sensitive cities is sort of addressing those. It's placing a value on non-market benefits of these assets. So, how much, like how many dollars is someone willing to pay to have a wetland rather than an existing unused area? What are the water quality benefits associated with that? So each kilogram of nutrients has a dollar value, because you'd have to pay to remove that to achieve a benefit to your receiving ecosystem. So there are now some really great tools, and I think that was a database of hundreds of international studies now available at a sort of a click to put a value on what you're trying to achieve with your green infrastructure. So it's really interesting. It's really great that it's been identified as a key limiting factor, is valuing these additional benefits, and now there are some tools that are available. So
that's fascinating, and hopefully we'll be able to have a chance to kind of talk a little bit more about that later on as well. But can I bring you in, Eleanor, on sort of like this question around like what is rewilding, because especially of your you helping usher in this new sort of planning reform or whatnot. It helps determine, like those kind of decisions help determine quite literally determine the outputs of our built environment. So, as through your lens, what are the opportunities with rewilding? What's best practice? And
well, planning, as most people know, is largely about land management anyway. So, I suppose to answer your original question, it needs a multifaceted approach. So you have to have the strategic vision, you have to have the policy, you have to have the words for planners to use. I always say that you need the words for planners to fight with, because if you don't have that sort of legislative framework and that policy framework, then you don't have anything anyway. You've got nothing to use. So, but then it's also about understanding how that detail gets applied on ground. So there's always that part of planning that's macro and micro, and they have to both talk to each other. So you need the strategic planners to set the vision, basically, for what our places are going to look like, what our landscape's going to look like, what our conservation values and vision is, what the storytelling and visioning component, and then you need the development assessment planners to pick up that vision. And I often make jokes about my planning bluff that I use with my clients. Don't tell anyone.
Do we need to edit this out as well?
Yeah, just edit it, just if there's any clients on here. To say, you'll never get that through planning unless you do an environmental management plan. But the planners don't even really know what that is, but I try anyway. So I think it's that whole thing of then making sure development applications, are site responsive and understand what their obligations actually are. So there's a role, quite a significant role for planners it's quite a foundational role that planners have to make sure that vision can happen on ground. And I think often poor old statutory planners are undervalued in terms of what they can actually pull off, and particularly under our new legislation, there's quite strong primary legislation, so there's actually a pretty great foundation for the state, in my humble opinion.
Nice.
No, I didn't write it, but it's actually really good for setting up South Australia. And I always say that SA just has the most stunning landscapes. It really is such the asset of this state, I think. So our planning industry is pretty keen to make sure that that's all protected, and that the policy content is actually there to support conservation and sustainability.
Yep. Oh, that's fantastic.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Makes sense to me. Does it make sense to y'all? It's okay. We can have question time later to clarify. But Liam, on we kind of talk. It's like infrastructure, a lot of built environment. There's a lot of opportunities in the development of built environment to help with conservation or even with regeneration. But the Nature Foundation and also with other sort of like decarbonization projects, it's all about also actively creating, like, rehabilitating land, right? It's to be able to absorb the carbon that we are putting out globally. So from, original question, best practice on rewilding. But what are the biggest opportunities perhaps in, is it this, like, do you think that your projects will be able to help in terms of rewilding of urban areas, creating that connection with nature, these multiple benefits of that? Or do you feel like that is always a little bit far out of the urban area as well? So how do we get that rewilding across what we feel is far away and already wild, but then also rewilding of this kind of areas that we interact with all the time?
There's a lot there.
I know.
Oh, well, I guess with my role with Nature Foundation, I've been with them for 6 months, and the majority of the work that we do isn't in built-up urban environments or in cities. It's on remote properties in some cases. Some are a bit closer to urban environments, but they offer a fantastic opportunity for the community to come out and be in nature. But often for people, that's not an option, or that's not something that they're immediately willing to go and do, drive hours away to come and see a wild place. My previous role was with City of Adelaide, working in the parklands, which is a little closer, I guess, to this topic in a sense. And it always blew my mind when sharing the stories of some of the biodiversity sites that are in the parklands. People just had no idea that they were there, hidden in plain sight. Some of the spots in Benitham Park, if you know where that is, down by the creek line, you could be down there and it's as wild as anywhere. So the term rewilding, yes, it is a buzzword. I agree. But what does it mean? And I did some reflecting, I guess, before this talk, and I feel that it's reintroducing nature on its own terms, in a sense. Obviously, as humans, we've tried to control nature and make us feel safe around nature, and that's why most people live in cities and in houses. They don't live in trees. But can we reintroduce it to these urban environments more on its own terms? And I stole this term, rewilding of our minds. It's maybe coming to terms with living in and with nature a little bit more than just trying to conquer it. And so I hope I answered some of your questions and queries, but I think the urban environment, if we can bring nature into these spaces, hopefully it's the catalyst to share that fascination with nature, with urbanites, and I'm one of those, to get them out into those remote areas and come visit one of our sites at Nature Foundation. And we've got a few properties, so always welcome.
Yeah. Well, that's first of all, to any of the panel, you don't have to be sorry about anything you say, because anything that you say is fascinating to all of y'all, right? Yes, that's right. So that's one. So y'all just take the edge off a little bit on that bit. But it's I really appreciate where you went with that, Liam, because the built environment creates space, right? It's like, what do we create space for? What do we allow to inhabit these spaces? And in a certain degree, we have not allowed nature to inhabit these spaces. Mainly because, the reality is that we humans, sometimes we do have to have distance from nature, right? But then at the same time, perhaps we've done so much that even Ben, you mentioned around the innate connection with nature, the biophilic need of humans, that we need to connect with nature, that we're not allowing that to thrive in our built environment. So, from your perspective, what might actually be small wins, big wins that will actually potentially allow us to have the positive impacts that we're all kind of talking to? It's like that connection with nature, multiple benefits of, whether it's economy, health, ongoing cost of resources, things like that. What are the small wins, big wins that we might be able to, kind of take away from different sort of fields, from your perspective at least? You got the mic, Kat. Good work.
Okay, so the small wins are probably and they're always really hard fought, but things like moving a service to put in a tree is such a great win for a landscape architect. Or having a client who will pay the little bit extra to turn a garden bed into a rain garden where appropriate. So those small wins, fantastic. I think the big wins, from a landscape architect's perspective, I'm particularly fascinated in watercourses as well, and I think working on those projects is great because what happens upstream affects what happens downstream, and you have the ability in those projects to create large-scale change by doing small things. So that's a really big win. But also I think just getting the word out. I don't know if you've recently watched David Attenborough's doco, where he actually spoke about what we can do to improve the environment. Knowing that there are things that we can actually do is fantastic. Yeah, I guess that kind of sums that one up.
Oh, awesome.
I've got nothing to criticise about that.
We're not here for criticism. We're about building each other up, Ben.
Small wins. I think in our roles probably equally we have the opportunity. I've been doing this now for about 30 years, and the small wins for me is like taking some school kids around a park and showing them trees and getting to learn just maybe one lesson out of our little tour or something like that. And for example, I always just end up with a finishing point to the kids, how long does it take for a tree to form a hollow? And when they all raise their hand and say, 80 to 100 years, I think that's a win, because they'll go home and they'll see a hollow and they'll tell their parents, hopefully. So that's a small win. The big win is, I don't want to plug my business, but we're making some big... we're sort of kicking some goals, getting a lot of cities to use our software and bringing trees into becoming more of an asset that's managed, like a real asset, and they're seeing the real value and the investment required and the need and the opportunities for urban forestry. So that's, to me, a huge win, and hence why I set forth on this this journey. But I think there's lots around, and it's easy to sort of forget all of the things that are happening, and it's very important to concentrate on those small little things, because it is just those conversations. And I look to some of the people that mentored me when I was young in arboriculture, etc., who have now retired or moved on, and I still carry some of the messages that they instilled into me, which now have been turned into some research papers and stuff like that. And I think they might not have seen that occur, but it's just these little conversations. You don't know where they'll lead, and it's just about having the conversation and recognising these things.
Well, there's a fascinating kind of point. Well, yeah, I actually want to bring Liam in on the next one, because you hit on something quite interesting, Ben, because you're helping develop the data that we need to actually visualize and conceptualize the importance of urban greening and stuff like that, right? And that sophistication of knowledge opens up a lot of things for the big wins. And yeah, please speak on that, because where I was leading to that for Liam is that, in terms of carbon, we actually didn't even have the language or the ability to measure that. I mean, we did. People were just like pushing it down from the public, but it's sort of like that kind of data also drives a lot of action. And so I wanted to also speak on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's why we set out, myself and my business partner, we sort of saw how complex nature is to manage with data and to communicate it. So essentially that's what we built a system essentially to be able to capture that and communicate it, because it is all interconnected. And what's great about trees, particularly, like I said before, I'm an environmental manager, but trees are a wonderful sort of like Trojan horse to communicate environmental messaging. And so essentially, if you can get people's attention towards a tree, then you can show them what's underneath the tree, and talk about the plants underneath, and maybe the microorganisms, etc. And you start getting them to appreciate more than just the tree itself. But yeah, going back to my original point earlier, it's about the communication and the messaging, which I didn't feel was available with the management of trees with software, and hence why we decided to build this system, which is doing well, and hopefully it'll be something that people look back and go, that was built and designed and developed here in South Australia. So
again, thank you, South Australia. Pew pew pew. Liam,
I guess, I mean, from a carbon perspective, in the urban environment, that's one way to measure progress. But I like the idea of measuring, not only carbon, but the relationships between some of the species that you're bringing in. It'd be great if we could, and there probably are monitoring programs for, aerial predators, falcons in the city, and kestrels, but also, if you have a little rewilding patch or urban biodiversity area, whether it's in the parklands or in a streetscape, can you look at the soil, the micro biological environment? There's a vast difference between a lawn, a landscaped area, and a revegetated or a remnant area when you look at the soil. So can you measure that? Also the invertebrates as well. That, from my perspective, that I find that very interesting. But you can also measure the carbon that you're sequestering as well. I mean, with carbon, ideally you'd have a very large area, so you might want to look at across the whole city and amalgamate all of the plantings up and measure it from that perspective to make it meaningful. But something that I was thinking about before this panel is these things cost money, and they cost money to maintain, and a landscape architect would know this very well. You can plan and design for something, but if you don't factor in that ongoing maintenance cost, whatever it may be, these plantings can fall over very easily. So I guess from the very beginning you need to have an aim and an objective, and then measure the progress towards that to justify, in some cases, maybe spending a little bit more money on a more natural or wild verge or a rooftop garden, for example, and maybe the benefits to the residents that live in that building or the council residents. So I don't know if I answered any of your questions, Ken, but
Liam, you're too polite. You're providing us with incredible things to think about.
Just give me a microphone and I'll just ramble on.
Yeah. Now you can stop, because we need Michael and also and Eleanor to also jump in on here, because
you guys also work at a very big scale, but then there's possibly a lot of small and big wins across infrastructure and also planning.
Yep. Yeah. So I think about small for potentially a small win, but it's a demonstration project that we did recently with a local government. So it was just reimagining what you can do with your council reserves. So there was there was a series of 3 reserves, and when you look at a heat map for Adelaide, it was really clear that it was bright red in the middle of these reserves. So they get much hotter than the paved surfaces around them if they're not irrigated correctly. The sort of bare soil can get extremely hot and contribute to your urban heat island impact. So yeah, it was a vision from council to reimagine those reserves. So if you talk about regeneration, if you look back historically, there was actually a watercourse running through these reserves that had been filled in the 70s, and they'd laid stormwater pipes to bring all that water underground in a controlled way. It's mainly to improve the flooding effectiveness of that channel. Which
made it worse.
Yeah, well, it only passes it downstream, as Kat has said. So regenerating it, we designed a system where you break into those underground stormwater pipes and bring the water back to the surface through the reserve. So reimagining what that original watercourse could have been like. And so that technique is called daylighting stormwater. You bring the stormwater back up to daylight, bringing it through the reserve. The pipe actually still serves a flooding benefit, so that still has benefit there. But then you can bring your smaller flows, your low flows, through a series of swales or underground trenches the main theme of this was to provide passive irrigation for a large number of new native tree plantings throughout the reserve, because that canopy cover is going to start to put a big dent in that urban urban heat impact. Yeah. So I think that was that type of idea, that demonstration project. If you can get a few of them happening, looking at your council reserves and get some concepts together. Get them into your formal planning documents so that they get funded in the future. That'd be really cool. Yeah. I'm happy to keep the big wins to Eleanor, maybe.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, pass the mic.
Thank you. Well, small and big wins planning, particularly in development assessment, you have to hang on to your small wins. You really do, because it propels you to keep fighting for the bigger stuff. Some of the smaller wins that a planner can have is, like once, many moons ago, I had an application for a new house on a bush block. They wanted to remove about 99 trees. Yes, not kidding. And I bargained them down to 1.
Whoa! You are a legend. Yes.
Just kept being bloody tenacious. And,
thank you.
And fought them on it, and then got a legal agreement on the site with an environmental management plan and building envelope. The irrigation area was outside of native veg. So there's some of the wins that you can have at a sort of a DA level that I think are really, really important. They all add up. Even sometimes just getting a decent landscape plan that includes natives. I'm working on a project at the moment and again, it's always that monetary issue where we had to remove talking about the urban heat island, 2 pretty substantial trees on the site because the canopy covered the entire site, pretty much, the drip line, but they were exotic and they were a pest. So what we've done is we ripped those out and then negotiated with council because the council was concerned about urban heat island, which is completely fair. But then I made the developer basically redo his plan to get a big SA blue gum in there and do some Indigenous planting around the front and had a mixture of understory, middle story and upper story, so that the overall development site, even though we now got 6 dwellings on that site and there was 1 before, there was a lot of wins. So I got double glazing in, I got some water sensitive urban design, you know, a proper Indigenous canopy tree that suited the soil type. So there's some of the sort of wins that you can have as a planner by being really bossy, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and maybe I love that. I love that sort of mindset though, because especially in the environment and sustainability space, we kind of are quite passive, so to speak, around, oh, this is a nice to have. It's like, no, wait a minute. None of this is nice to have. This is all essential.
Yeah.
All essential across the board. And usually the reason why that they're, even from my perspective as a sustainability consultant, is that they are a nice to have is just because no one thought about it at the beginning. So no one carved out that budget from the beginning. And hence why all these values that we're talking about down along every, sorry about that, Michael, my pen's getting too close to your face. Yeah, it's like, that we can at least have those values along multiple spots along whether it's like built environment thinking, conceptualization, planning, landscape, sustainability, engineering, like it all has to kind of fit all together and be at almost every stage.
And, this site is a good example of, urban consolidation is actually really important for making sure that our key areas, in rural, outside the urban growth boundary, are actually protected. So it's good to sometimes find that happy balance where the developer gets his yield, but then you actually do get some value add as well. And I think part of it is, as I said before, about making sure that planning policy enables you to do that. So you've actually got the words to use. So I can say to the client, look, this is what I think needs to happen.
Yeah.
And as part of the new planning and design code as well, what I've been saying to a lot of clients is that because it's now performance assessment, so some of the numbers and the numerical tests have gone, that I've said to them, I'll get your approval if you add some more ESD and sustainability stuff in it, because I can then say that policy will outrank some of that smaller detail about whether it's 9 metre frontage or 7 metre frontage. But if we've got bike racks, we've got proper planting, we've got now under the new system too, we've got one of the bigger wins that the state government's been able to pull off is the tree, urban tree scheme. So basically all new dwellings and residential development have to have 20% green space, soft landscaping, and have to have a tree per dwelling, which is a massive win for SA. It's just not been done before. And certainly as a planner, it's quite difficult to sometimes argue to have that happen. So that's a massive win for the state, I think.
Good.
And then we just need to make sure the
suited to
offset
site.
fund, because there's an offset fund that's been created, that money goes to people like yourselves to actually, do some re-veg.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, that's fantastic kind of thoughts there. And where we'd like to take that conversation that we've had so far is also include all of you here. So, Tin, we're going to share one mic, but Renee, could I get your help in grabbing one of these mics? And there's a couple of questions on the chat, so you can actually make that big. But while we're setting that all up, would anyone in the audience with us tonight like to ask a question? Whoa, quick. Jenna, and then we'll go to the Zoom.
Thank you, and thank you. That was all super interesting. When we talk about rewilding cities, in Australia, most of our cities are very coastal. So I was wondering if anyone on the panel has any clever ideas about the way that our cities interface with these coastal environments, oceans, dunes, I guess sandy environments and that sort of thing. If anyone has any thoughts on how that might look from a rewilding perspective.
So I mentioned watercourses before. So what we do upstream affects what we do downstream. So by rewilding our watercourses and improving the health of them, that then improves what actually happens down on the coastline. So this is more about the ecological side of it and less about the built side of it. So I think that's still key to rewilding our coast. I've actually done some projects going back to uni when I was looking at the coast and looking at things from a landscape architecture perspective, how we can construct landscapes in the ocean itself. A few crazy ideas out there, things like man-made reefs. What can we do to stop literal sand drift? We've got the sea, what it's called, seagrass garden bed. Yep, they are. Oh my God, I can't find my words tonight. I'm really sorry, Ken.
Don't be sorry.
Yeah. They're depleted and eroding. So, how can we use landscape structures to actually improve the health of those? I don't actually have an answer for you on that one yet, but it's something that I think we could look into.
But then there's also some fantastic projects that are already happening in South Australia, like for instance the Estuary Care Foundation. They've actually leveraged even 3D printing of trying to actually create these forms that, like even native oysters can start to form on. So then there's some incredibly, like through design, but then, like whether that's like infrastructure, planning, landscape, or, even trying to think about what sort of like projects, like even like the data around that becomes like the future opportunities, right? It's like we can actually tie that into design excellence. And not only that, it helps with our infrastructure and like just water quality, all that kind of stuff. And you can take the mic, you can pass the mic anytime if anyone wants to jump in.
Sorry.
I can only talk about data really. so basically, having more information in regards to the species of tree that we can plant across, say, metropolitan Adelaide, for example, and how that affects, those trees perform in coastal areas as opposed to the hills, etc. So getting more information. I'm still sort of grappling with the term rewilding myself because it's new to me. I think nature-based solutions is another sort of term along it. I like to think of it, I don't want to change its meaning or anything, is just connecting people back with nature. So, I mean, realistically, that's how I see it, but I guess that's another topic for another day. What does it mean and how to define it? But that's what it means to me. So, again, going back to data, if we can capture that information and reconnect people back to with nature, and so we can capture that knowledge and that learning about what species grow where and how they perform, well, then that's, I guess, helping the cause.
Yeah.
I was just going to say I like that, bringing in the connection with nature for people, that telling the stories of the relationships between, the seagrass meadows or the sand dunes, the different fauna that are, living within the sand dunes and how they're interacting with the different plant species. I think data is hugely important. Can be hard for people to comprehend, can't it? And that's where beautiful pieces of software come in and make it simple for people. But the stories, and if we can simplify those stories as well, that helps people to get behind implementing more of a natural environment. And I know a lot of coastal councils use a lot of native plants when they're planting within the sand dunes and in their landscaping. So that's, again, not an answer to your question, but some thoughts.
However, if we can get it on this side, because I was also going to ask is like from what have you also seen for either the state or even even Australia wide around like these coastal sort of areas, opportunities?
Well, I'm on the York Peninsula Assessment Panel, and also did quite a bit of planning on the Victorian Surf Coast. So I suppose from my perspective, part of it is, I was going to make a joke about sand dunes. The York Peninsula Council recently developed a twitch about it. I wasn't there, I had to declare conflict, but approved a house right on top of a sand dune, a fragile dune where there's an endangered osprey in the locality for which I'm doing an osprey nest with the department and with David Spears, the Environment Minister, to do that. And yet a house was approved right on top of a sand dune, hence my twitch.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those things where planning has a really big role in making sure that those decisions in terms of protecting our coastal environments just don't happen. And if the policy isn't there, then you've got nothing to, I know I bang on about that, but you've got not a lot to work with. Or if the planners don't necessarily, talking about winds again, if the planners don't necessarily understand what ecological values actually mean. So if they don't understand, I'm not saying that all planners should be ecologists because it's a very complicated science, but if you don't understand how to apply those words about, then these decisions can get through. So I suppose that was my joke about a sand dune. Don't approve houses on top of sand dunes.
Hell yeah, don't do that.
It's bad.
Ever. I just wanted to, I can read it, but Tin, could you also put the volume up on the TV just in case? So Steve Fuller, he's stated that the Australian Association for Environmental Education SA is hoping to obtain a grant from Green Adelaide to help establish a pilot local multi-purpose mini botanical garden as an educative and engaging means of connecting urban Adelaideans with our native flora and fauna. So there's a long list of things that could become: butterfly garden, mini forest of trees, bee hotels, frog pond, bush tucker. The question here is, any advice on how to encourage or support this initiative of being able to put that out from an idea that they could potentially get funding for to execution? What do y'all think?
Yeah, so the Greening Adelaide grants funding has a list of criteria, and they're looking for key elements essentially in regards to what they're trying to hit there. So I would suggest that the Australian Institute of Environmental Education. So I would say talk to the education department, get as many talk to local council, and try to get as many parties on board with you as well, because it is about collaboration. They're looking at larger, I suppose, projects or projects that have the opportunity to branch out and maybe be used as a test project. But there is a list of criteria on the grant application. I would read through that thoroughly, and I hope this is answering the question, and try to meet as many of those KPIs as possible.
Anyone else want to speak to?
Get a landscape architect on board.
That's right. Plug the industry.
So,
yeah,
sorry.
Go.
I think selling a story, romanticising it, is always a great thing to do, regardless. Like, KPIs are great, but some people will get a little bit bored. No, I'm not disagreeing. I'm not. I'm just saying, put a bit of fluff in and really sell, what it is and what the benefits are.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'll just do another question from Zoom and then go back to the audience. Is Marlon Kobacker? He says, he asks whether anyone has seen an example of a green bond, climate bond, social bond financing a rewilding / regenerative project, either internationally or through Australia, New Zealand. Have you seen the green, it's almost like it's an uprising, and then it'll probably be like a tidal wave of green finance. And then from then, it's not necessarily around, we need to actually find funding for this. It's actually these pockets, even the development offset scheme is that's a pool of money that's meant to be used to facilitate a regeneration project. Have you seen that? Yes, Liam, talk to me.
Yeah, so speaking directly to the significant environmental benefit offsets, for those of you that aren't familiar, if, for example, a solar developer has to clear some native vegetation through their development, they're required by law to offset and achieve a net gain in biodiversity. So in some cases, it's not possible. There's no land in that vicinity in the same ecosystem type to have an on-ground offset, so they pay into the Native Vegetation Fund. But the best case scenario, and this is where organisations like Nature Foundation come in, is we can facilitate on-ground meaningful biodiversity outcomes for this clearance, which is obviously, if possible, best to be avoided or minimised, and we often work with developers to try and minimise that impact as well. But I guess to the question, I guess they're pointing to the fact that is there money out there, and with the research that I've been doing over the past 6 months when I've been with Nature Foundation, from an international perspective, there are huge funds wanting to invest money in both from a carbon perspective, but also in a meaningful biodiversity perspective. So there are large organisations with millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, wanting to invest in meaningful biodiversity outcomes. And again, I would come back to resting on, for these projects, they must be backed up by data and proven to have meaningful biodiversity outcomes. But companies like Microsoft are investing millions of dollars in some cases, American and Australian farms here to regenerate the biodiversity here, both from a carbon and a biodiversity perspective. So if Microsoft are doing it, that's a signal that other corporates are heading that way as well. And most are not reacting to regulatory requirements. It's the risk being pushed from their investors, saying you need to factor this in now, otherwise there's a significant financial risk going forward from a climate change perspective. So maybe this is the first question I'll actually answer. There is money going around, but it's a matter of tapping into that. I'm talking from a big perspective, but there are smaller organisations wanting to invest in this as well. So trying to team up with those organisations would be best.
Michael, could I bring you in on this because from your experience, it's in terms of especially like stormwater, that's big infrastructure, right? We would think that a lot of it's coming from state government or federal funding and stuff like that. That being said, have you seen changes in how people even are looking at the financial risk if they don't include sort of like rewilding or, like you're saying, daylighting the stormwater, like making sure that if we're stacking quite literally, if we're stacking the functions and making sure, like, not only do we improve quality of water and making sure that this money goes further, what also is some like this relation to bigger pots of money that are trying to do good to it. Like how does that also how does like infrastructure also tap into that?
Yeah, so I just remember speaking to someone at one council, and they were able to demonstrate a project involving, I guess, distributed water storages throughout the council, and it did stacked up. Like the financial cost of it, the benefits completely outweighed it. But then getting it to the accountants in the council, they would have their own methods for estimating the costs and benefits of that, and it's usually a financial only. They won't look at the second or third order consequences of implementing these infrastructure. Yeah,
like SOR, like social return on investment kind of stuff as well.
So, but I mentioned earlier the CRC for water sensitive cities tools that apply a benefit cost analysis to the non-market values, so the amenity value, the water quality, biodiversity values of green infrastructure, that you can sit down and look up the tool, apply a rate for your infrastructure. So that was based on a number of governments having an accepted practice within their own accounting system. So yeah, we're sort of coming up to speed of being able to get an accepted valuation on that whole stack, not just the like financial costs or cost savings in water savings or
Right.
whatnot. So yeah, I think we're getting there, and it's getting into a format where it's being the values of these additional benefits that all of these projects bring are being recognised and valued at a dollar cost.
Yeah, right. So Marlon, I'm not sure if again, sorry we didn't answer your question. We're just talking up here. But I guess we're almost like on the cusp of knowing how can these funds really trigger a trigger either small or big wins or big projects that will have this run-on effect of not only making sure that it does create financial return opportunities for those investors, but at the same time checks off on a lot of things around whether it's risk, the investment risk of it, but also what are from the data, we're starting to actually show exactly how, from an ecological standpoint, what are the improvements, and that can go side by side what that financial return might be. So I'm guessing none of us have heard of anything of that nature here in South Australia.
I think there's some in the United States I've read about, but haven't got, like even the stormwater management bodies in the United States start to look at that as potential finance mechanism. But
right.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it being applied. So.
Which creates an interesting thought bubble, just quickly, before we go to one of our in-house questions, is perhaps, for instance, the state government established Green Adelaide. And that body quite literally is a funding, even Steve mentioned that they're trying to get funding from Green Adelaide. But if Green Adelaide also knew how to potentially leverage these climate bonds or these green bonds and actually be able to facilitate those kind of funding trickling down into the projects that they help greenlight, get excited about how we can just be like, yeah, you get a stormwater infrastructure plan, you get a butterfly garden, you get a green. We'd be like Oprah up here. We had a question in the middle. Yep.
Really good to see the diversity of different people here tonight. I think it's a great opportunity to pick people's brains about different aspects of it. There's been a lot of talk about the financial incentives around what I would call regreening rather than rewilding. And that is increasing the number of plants and animals in our urban environments is recognised, but not the rewilding, i.e. restoring ecosystems to pre-European arrival. And if we're actually looking at biodiversity targets, then the regreening isn't necessarily addressing any of that. Are there actually aims within your respective industries to address the rewilding aspect?
Yeah, again, a part of the frustration, I suppose, with urban forestry, as you see, if you look on most streets, is the similar, a monocote sort of variety of species down the roads. And so, yeah, with the software, we can look at, increasing diversity, basically, and that's what the software provides users immediately. They can instantly see how vulnerable their urban forest population is to climate change and stuff, which encourages them to have an argument towards planting species that might not be the most popular or might not be the most common, which is very important as we move towards climate change. It's a great question as well, and I believe it relates to this whole conversation. One of the greatest challenges, I think, in regards to managing the natural environment is we've become so risk averse, and that's going from a government level down to an individual's level. As soon as you say we want to introduce something new, most people start to panic, and so yeah, we need to start taking a few risks to work out what species. For example, I'm just talking about trees here. What works, what doesn't work, the success, and because we've become so conservative, we're only wanting to plant a tree that will perform a certain way, but they all have pros and cons, and so through information and through data, we can actually start learning about some of those pros and cons as well.
Yeah. Well, I was actually going to ask if Kat, if you could kind of address this as well, because, for instance, the landscape architecture profession as a whole has declared a climate and biodiversity crisis. Yeah. So, like, from your standpoint on like reflection of your own profession, and Eleanor, I'd actually like to ask the same thing about like planning too, is that question about like rewilding. How do we actually, and that also makes a connection to what Liam was saying around like give space. Like, how do we actually give space for nature to do its thing and thrive?
So I guess I'm going to talk more from my own personal opinion on this. So it is very frustrating because we do need space to be able to do it. I mean, we can build biodiversity corridors and we can revegetate in those areas, but they might be quite narrow corridors, and what we do might not be enough to support what was originally there. Controversially, I guess, we have to have a habitat as well. So we have to live and live the way that we live now. But I think taking risks and trying new things in our landscape is also really important. I think we have to try some things that we haven't done before. Beyond ripping up buildings on the coast or completely giving back spaces to nature, I don't really think that we can do exactly what you're saying. I think we actually need to give some land back if we want to achieve what you're saying.
I suppose probably the most relevant area in planning in terms of re-establishing pre-European landscapes is around growth area planning. We don't really have that necessarily in South Australia, but it is coming. We're officially we don't have any net migration loss anymore, so we're actually in the black for population growth in SA. And there's a lot of, I think,
Let's keep it that way, y'all.
Yeah, that's right. I think
South Australia is fantastic. Keep coming.
Yeah, to a point.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things where growth will happen in South Australia. It's about the planning sector preparing for that properly. So, say, as an example, in Melbourne, a lot of when you do, because I used to be growth area planner there, when you're looking at the big land divisions, and you've got to obviously then do all that research, you get ecologists involved to look at what the pre-European species were, what that landscape should look like, what the ecological values are. So, as an example, if it's river red gum, vegetation class, then we know that river red gums need to be like 40 metres, spaced apart to have any real value, et cetera, et cetera. So, planning for new areas is really quite, it's really important that the ecological science, because planners need the data to actually then work with and need the science to back up the decision making. So when you've got that, then you can actually plan. And obviously you've got to have when you're doing growth area planning, the developer's not just going to say, oh yes, that's fine, I'll do with less with, I'll forego $3 million just so you can have an extra wide habitat link. But there's ways that planners can negotiate, and the way that the legislation is structured, and particularly in Victoria around all the offsets, is actually quite well established, because it's been happening for so long now, that growth, like some of the big firms like Mirvac and Stockland and some of the big they all know what they need to do, and they have to. So I came over here to work on Gawler East, and I was completely horrified at what the developer was trying to get away with that I'd worked with in Melbourne and that can do in Sydney and Queensland. I was like, no. Just because it's Adelaide doesn't mean you can get away with that here. And then I had to walk them through getting proper flora and fauna assessments. So Concordia, as an example, that's all been redone. So there's about 3 months of proper surveys being done. I probably didn't answer the question either. However, I will say that, absolutely those values are integral to planning.
Yeah, and then we have to really try to think of the various opportunities to link that through, and maybe then it's never about like token landscape or tokens kind of stuff like that. It's about really understanding the site, creating space, and then going from there. We have time for one more, so I'll take it from the front row, and that's what you get for sitting in the front row, that you get to ask the last question.
I'm
Fantastic.
sorry to
Thank
be
you, Linda.
boring. This is a very direct and very tight question for you, Eleanor. I'm wondering if there's, following up on your question, but also the risk adversity stuff, is there any provision in the new planning reform for taking away some of our lighting that we have at night time, because nature doesn't have bright lights at night time? So is there any provision in planning reform for that?
You're going to laugh at this. One of my friends in Melbourne was working on a KFC development, and there was a massive river red gum that was right near the bucket that was being proposed. And it was like months and months and months of trying to protect this tree, and then the planner completely forgot that the bucket lit up, and so therefore, and it was right near the hollows. So we always, I was teasing him, I'm like, that bloody bucket, those possums are not sleeping. So anyway, that was a side joke. But yeah, look, I think it's about, in planning, you have to look at the minutiae of what's being proposed. So say as an example, landscape plans are increasingly being asked for, which is awesome. As part of the new planning system as well, there's more policy impetus to make sure that that's done. And there's more and more landscape architects being employed in local government. So part of that is making sure that there's some cohesion between the development assessment and making sure you've got experts actually looking at the landscape plan for that development and making sure that, there isn't a KFC bucket right next to a river red gum with hollows. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you for a quick and direct question to bring us out, Lindley. Much appreciated on that one. I do want to say thank you to also our Zoom community. I don't know, like Tin, I don't know if you can bring up the comments section, but there was like so much fantastic dialogue and questions like around, even just in the how better do we promote rewilding? How can like even local communities be brought in? So like more of like the social aspect of like how do local communities actually participate in the ongoing maintenance of our urban environments? Even what are some careers that might be opening up to contribute to this space? And also, once again, like how do we continue to gather data? How do we map our ecological communities? I really appreciate everyone on Zoom asking these questions as well, because, one, we don't have enough time to kind of get around to it all, but it also showcases a strong, almost thirst. There's a strong thirst for everyone involved here, and then also, I'm pretty sure your own networks outside of that to really kind of tackle this question. But to kind of like draw us out to the finale of this bit and pieces, I was wondering if I could just quickly challenge y'all from a quick hot take. Wow, shooting straight from the hip around if Adelaide was going to be more wild. It's kind of weird, right? Wilder, more wilder. That's probably not the right grammatical way of saying it, but yeah, along those lines, if we were to really make an impact on the biodiversity crisis, rewild our cities here, Adelaide, Tandanya, what would that kind of look for you? Just quick down the line. We'll start with you, Michael. Doctor.
How does it look? So I guess I've sort of my work. I think about the allotment scale all up to the catchment scale. So it'd be great to see the same footprint of greenery and connectivity with wildlife at the allotment scale, and as you zoom out, that's sort of maintained all the way up to the catchment scale. So I guess that's it means that if we achieve that, does mean that people are taking it upon themselves to change their own built environment around them to better reflect what's happening within the ecosystem environment at a larger scale. So
micro macro working together.
Yeah, micro macro.
Synergy. Thank you so much.
As above, so below.
Yeah.
Mine's pretty bloody straightforward, which is getting the ESD principles into the planning controls and into the National Construction Code, and making it mandatory.
Yes. Thank you.
So the first thing that popped into my mind when you asked that question was during COVID, the kangaroo on Sturt Street.
Oh,
If
yeah.
you'll remember that.
Going
But
through Victoria Square.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think being able to be in the city but know that you're in an Australian landscape, I think that's something our cities are very European in the way they look. It'd be great to actually see a lot more of Australia in the way that we do things, kind of branding ourselves a little bit.
Yes. Love it.
Yeah, I'm going to finish off saying I totally agree again, because I feel bad about the one person. No, yeah, I think the more you travel internationally, the more you appreciate Adelaide, particularly. And I think we've got to give credit to people like Don Dunstan and Playford and stuff like that, who actually, and Colonel Light, who actually set those big vision goals. I mean, they really showed true leadership. And they didn't do that because they were just the lone soldier. They did that because they had community support. So going back to my point, if we have community connected with nature, they're going to be pushing our politicians to ensure that we protect this beautiful state. And I think that's what I'd like to see. In the future, I'd like to see those that are fearful of nature, the minority, and those who appreciate and are connected with nature and support nature, the majority.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Colonel Light was who he was, but yeah.
Talk about throwing shade at the end of the...
We won't go down that track. But yeah, stroke of genius, obviously a city within a park. Really bloody lucky to have that surrounded and woven through Adelaide. Makes it far more livable. Are we still top 10 livable cities?
Hell yeah.
Yeah,
Top
we'll
10
say
in
we
my
will.
book.
Yeah.
Number one. Number one.
But a pet idea I've wanted to get going for a while, and I spoke with Jock Gammon from Jungle Fire, who's East Coast sort of urban greening mob. I was involved in the Victoria Park grassland regeneration, if you know that area there, and I've always wanted to get those biodiverse grasslands on rooftops.
Huh. Yeah.
So if anyone's in that sphere or has a rooftop, let's talk, because all right, let's talk after.
Awesome.
I really like that. That's what I want to see, just every rooftop with grasslands.
And I usually don't throw my own kind of little visions on there, but I would really love to see swimming in the Torrens. I'm just putting it out there. That
I have swum in the Torrens head first, and you come out in a nasty rash.
But like, this is the thing, is that cleaned up to a certain degree that, you know, you have that access to that, even along within like the city. And I got to shout out the homie Sam Taylor, who might be on the call at the moment, but you know, he proposed that as part of his council bid. But ever since he said that, it was like a light bulb moment. It's sort of like, man, if we could actually do a lot of this micro to macro and really think about how do we actually value and treat our water, and then actually be able to give space. Like, because there's plenty of ways to naturally, you know, improve the quality of water. And that could, you know, like, think about like the tourism opportunities, all like stacks on stacks on stacks on stacks of opportunity. But, you know, at the same time, everything of what you all have also said creates fantastic opportunities for us. So could you all join me in celebrating these fantastic people? So thank you so much for joining us tonight.